Okay, so far in this little journey, you will have been solving lots of equations. So you might have solved stuff like 4x plus 2 equals 9, say, or we've solved stuff with unknowns on both sides. So 5x plus 7 equals 2x minus 11, that kind of thing. So you solve this style of equation. Now that style of equation contains just x's on their own. So 5x's, 2x's, but nothing more complicated than an x. Those are called linear equations if they contain just a single x. Now, what we would like to look at today takes it up a step. So instead of having a single x, sometimes you'll find equations have an x squared in them. And those equations can be quite complicated. You can have x squared and x's and numbers. Those are called quadratic equations. You will see other names for them, but at the moment we're going to call them quadratic equations. That's the name that you'll see most commonly. And quadratic equations are a whole lot more complicated because they have this x squared. And actually, you're not going to learn how to solve this type of quadratic equation until you reach certainly kind of nearly National 5 level. Maybe the end of next year into National 5, you'll learn how to solve this type of equation here. But there are some equations with x squared in them that we can learn how to solve. So we're going to have a look at those today and see what they look like. So the type of equation that you know how to solve, or you're going to be able to solve, is x squared equals 16. Now, at the moment, we want to do the same to both sides. The same to both sides, well, we could square root both sides. That's the opposite of squaring. So we've got x squared here. The opposite of having x squared is the square root. So that leaves us with x equals square root 16. And the square root of 16 is 4. Now, don't leave the video quite yet. It is not quite as straightforward as that, unfortunately. And this is why I've held off on showing x squareds in equations up until this point. Because, well, what does x squared mean? Well, having x equals 4 means that 4 times 4 equals 16. That's why 4 squared equals 16. That's why x equaling 4 is a solution. However, there's another possible number. If I do minus 4 times minus 4, that is also 16, because negative times a negative is a positive. 4 times 4 is our 16. That creates an issue because we can either have positive 4 or negative 4. So we show that in our answer as putting a little plus or minus there, and a little plus or minus there. And that shows us we can have positive 4 or minus 4 as our answers to the equation. So actually 2 answers to this equation here. One is positive 4, the other answer is minus 4. And so that is what makes these equations a little bit trickier. You get 2 solutions, and you'll find that even with our more complicated quadratics, like this one, you'll always get 2 solutions when you have a quadratic. Now, there's actually a slight complexity to that I'll show you in a second. Now, I'll do another little example for you. So we could have x squared equals 100. In that case, x equals plus or minus the square root of 100. So I'm square rooting both sides. And so x equals plus or minus 10, working out what the square root of 100 is. So that is our answer. Now, some people will write this as 10 or minus 10. I like to write it this way. It's just more compact. And so long as you know what the plus minus sign means, it's just easier to write. Now, there's 2 things left to tackle. The first one is if we have something like x squared equals 11. Well, we can square root both sides. Square rooting this side gives us x. Square rooting this side gives us root 11. We could have the positive square root or the negative square root. And actually, just like sometimes we left answers as fractions, That is a perfectly good answer. You can leave it with the square root. We call that a surd. But you can leave your answer with the square root like that. You could, and I'm going to use a wiggly equals for approximately equal to, you could write plus or minus 3.32. But there is no harm in leaving your answer just as plus or minus square root of 11 if it's not a nice square number. So up here where it's 100, I would always make it simpler. Down here, I would just leave it as plus or minus the square root of 11. Now, there is one final complexity to look at, and that is what happens in this case here, which is if we have x squared equals minus 2. Now, why is that an issue? Well, that's an issue. We're looking for a number times itself that gives us minus 2. But if our number is positive, then we have positive times positive. And so our answer is positive. If we start with a negative number, then because we're squaring it, it will be negative times negative, which we've just said a moment ago is positive. That means we can't put a number x in here that gives us a negative answer, because the only thing that can happen is we get a positive answer. There are numbers out there that do this, that give us a negative answer when we square them, but they're called complex numbers, and you won't meet those for a very long time. That's beyond National 5 when you get to complex numbers. So instead, what we are going to write here, and this is a perfectly acceptable answer, this equation has no real solutions. And that word real is important because, as I say, we've got complex solutions, but no real solutions. That's the nice numbers you know about, like things like 10 and root 11, which is 3.32. These are real numbers, things that you know how to work with. So we write that. That's our conclusion. No real solutions. We don't yet know how to solve this. So the only thing you now know how to solve is things with an x squared, not with anything more complicated. Up here, we can't solve it because we've got an x squared term, but there's also a 3x in there, which is like your linear equations. And as soon as you've got both, things get a lot more complicated. And as I say, you won't learn how to solve something as complicated as this for a little while yet. But that does give us a new skill that you can work with, which is solving an equation x squared equal to a number. You now know how to write your solution to that. So have a go at the questions. And there is one other skill for you if you've had a go at this and you want to keep stretching yourself.